The United Kingdom, a proud warrior nation. Welsh, Scots, Irish, and English. They fight under the same flag, with the same bulldog spirit. And this dog likes to bite.
They are very well trained, and they are a very professional outfit.
Within their rank is a Special Forces unit unlike any other, the Royal Marines.
Small groups of highly trained men, daggers between the teeth.
Prepare to get locked and loaded as we go back through generations of technology to trace the evolution of Britain's lean, green fighting machine, the Royal Marines. It's time to go ballistic. The Royal Marines are a hard, no-nonsense fighting machine. From raiding in the Age of Sail to outfoxing the Argentinians in the Falklands and going toe-to-toe with the Taliban in Afghanistan. The Royal Marine Commandos will mix it up anywhere and everywhere. To defeat and destroy their enemies, they use the SA-80 assault rifle. For amphibious and dry landings, they use the all-terrain Viking. And if they have to get in close, Marines have carried the legendary Fairbairn Sykes fighting knife. Their motto is, per mare, per terra, by sea, by land. No obstacle is big enough or unassailable. Now, Weaponology will unlock their family tree, going back through generations of technology to reveal how weapons, transport, and tactics have evolved the Royal Marines as the spearhead of British Forces special units. The Royal Marines' origins lay as far back as the Age of Sail, long before American Marines were on the high seas. In the 17th century, they acted as on-ship security. It was a dirty job that demanded excellent close combat skills. Fast forward 300 years, World War II, and those skills would help redefine the Royal Marines. British forces are on the brink of being wiped out. German troops have smashed through Holland, Belgium, and France. Now only the English Channel stands between Hitler and domination of Europe.
By the middle of 1940, the British Army had its arse kicked in Northern Europe. We'd been kicked out of France. We'd had to be evacuated from Dunkirk. It was quite clear to the government at the time, led by Winston Churchill, that we needed to go and win somewhere, win something.
British Prime Minister Winston Churchill had to move fast and decisively. He put his weight behind the formation of an elite unit, a unit that would specialize in unconventional warfare.
Churchill was always very keen on creating commandos. These were battalion-size units which could be landed on the coast of Europe and could do damage.
Now, all Churchill needed was a group of men who weren't afraid to get their feet wet and their daggers bloody. The Royal Marines fitted the bill.
He came up with this idea of Royal Marines that could go in, butcher and bowl. Basically, amphibious warfare, cause tremendous damage, get away, and then regroup and go back again.
Royal Marine Commandos would be tasked with some of the most daring operations of World War II. Sicily, Normandy, the Rhine, and D-Day.
Along the invasion beaches, there were a variety of forts occupied by the Germans which needed to be knocked out so that the main landing force could get ashore without too many casualties.
These raiders cut their way to the enemy's heart with the precision, stealth, and swiftness of a surgeon's scalpel.
We're used to operating far away on our own, in small groups. Our ethos, commando spirit, well, it was a word that arose out of the Boer War from an Afrikaans word, commando, meaning raiders. And that's precisely what we like to do. Small groups of highly trained men, you know, daggers between the teeth.
The glint of the moonlight on steel, the stifled death rattle of the German sentry. This would become the commandos' calling card.
One of the aspects of commando fighting was the need to get in very close and to kill sentries. Not by shooting them, because that would be noisy, but with a knife.
The commando knife of choice was 7 inches long and thin enough to slide between an enemy's ribs. Known as the Fairbairn Sykes fighting knife, it was a natural-born killer.
What I have here is a World War II issue British Army commando knife, correctly termed the Fairbairn Sykes fighting knife. It was extremely popular with the commandos and designed purely for one thing, and that was for dispatching the enemy. It's not a utility knife, it's a fighting knife.
In 1907, 2 Brits, William Fairbairn and Eric Sykes, were serving on the bloody streets of Shanghai with their municipal police force. Fairbairn and Sykes were fascinated by the street fighting they witnessed and how, with the correct training and tools, an enemy could be swiftly and silently extinguished. They experimented with developing a knife for the job. Weapons trainer Ken Hackerthorne is a knife specialist and rates the Fairbairn Sykes as a cut above the rest.
If somebody threw a punch at you or trying to grab you, you could cut and cause a loss of blood. That's why it's sharpened on both edges all the way back the hilt. So no matter where you made contact, you could cut and cause arterial bleeding. Well, if I actually want to try to stick him, remember, I'm better off with the flat grip, because like so, expecting the knife to go through the ribs could be difficult. So I would hold it like so, but what I want to do is I want to come in low and come up under the rib cage. I want to go up in, below the ribs, up in. Remember, when I bring it, I want to work it. I want to twist it to come out so I'm doing as much cutting as possible. The other system is, if I'm coming up, say for example, a sentry, I could come up with a couple techniques. One is the fencing grip, where I come up and I trap him like so and use this thing to cut across. Or I can hold it as a puncher grip and I can grab him like so and try to drive the knife right down through here. So I want to do as much damage as you can to the airway, in, twist and work it, and then out.
The design of the knife was solely to kill. Not only was it thin enough to go through the ribs, it also had to be long enough to puncture vital organs.
One of the things that the Allies learned, that if, for example, of a German soldier wearing a heavy wool winter coat, they needed a long blade to get through the garments and reach deep enough to get the vital zone. A short blade simply was not effective. Hence, the reason they chose a long blade to get through the garments in deep enough, cause enough laceration to cause a loss of blood pressure and rapid incapacitation of the enemy. Very effective tool.
The Fairbairn Sykes was the perfect tool for stealth operations. But it couldn't take out multiple enemies. For that kind of work, the Royal Marine Commandos relied upon another iconic weapon, the Sten gun. Over 4 million Stens were made in the 1940s, making it one of the most recognizable weapons of World War II. Cheap and easy to manufacture, The Mark III could be produced in 5 hours and contained as little as 47 parts. This minimalist design meant it could fire without any lubrication, useful in desert environments where oil attracts dust. But the Sten also had some serious drawbacks. Its magazine was prone to jamming, and its mechanism was loud and clunky. Allied soldiers called it the stench gun and the plumber's nightmare.
The thing about the Sten gun is it fires from what is known as an open bolt. And when you pull the trigger on a Sten gun, that bolt slams into the back of the cartridge. And there is a big sound with that. And then blowback occurs, and you blow the bolt back. So when you're firing a Sten, you're making a hell of a racket.
Here we go.
Loud and industrial, the Sten wasn't exactly the stealth weapon the Royal Marine Commandos wanted. But then came a serious modification. In 1943, a silencer was added, making it the first suppressed submachine gun.
By using a silencer for the Sten gun, the Royal Marines were able to operate covertly, and that was a big advantage.
This is the Mark II Sten gun with a suppressor attached. The suppressed version was used for sentry removal and surprise attacks, particularly by raiding troops we now call commandos.
Going hot!
Well, as you can see, the bulk of the noise you heard was the bullet impacting on that steel plate.
The suppressed Sten. Silent but violent. Perfect for the Royal Marine Commandos. The Royal Marines can take you down stealthily with a razor-sharp knife, or ruin your day with a hail of lead. Skilled in every art of warfare, these Brits endure the maddest, baddest training regime in the world.
They weed out the weak sisters, so who's left are pretty dead gum.
The Royal Marines are an all-terrain machine. A 4x4 elite unit with no reverse gear. Sent in to do the jobs other units can't or won't do. They're trained to fight in every conceivable terrain. Selection and training is fierce, and only the toughest survive.
You just don't go, hey, I want to join. They sort of have to look at you, and they weed out the weak sisters. So who's left are pretty dead gum good.
To even get to day one requires going through some pretty difficult selection tests, and I think roughly 1 in 5 managed to get through the selection tests.
But for those selected, the real pain is just around the corner. Awaiting them is the ultimate in endurance, and what is the longest training regime of any infantry unit in the world.
The basic training course for a private soldier in the Royal Marines is at least 28 weeks. That includes their commando course, which is the sort of physical toughening up.
To get through training, combat, life, Royal Marines have a unique but essential weapon, a sense of humor.
And they will always tell you that if you can't take a joke, you shouldn't have joined. It does require a certain sense of humor to be a Royal Marine Commando.
You learn how to keep going when life just seems completely miserable. It's hard to do that on your own. When I've thought I've been hours away from death, then I've wanted to enjoy the time that I do have left. And one of the ways you do that is by laughing about things.
The Royal Marine sense of humor is reinforced by an intense bonding process. They're a family that will fight and die for each other.
When you're standing in a trench next to someone and you're being shot at, the person on your right and the person on your left become your best friends, and you don't want to let them down, and that's what motivates you.
The Royal Marines' ethos, positive attitude, self-sacrifice, shone through in World War II. Time and again, men put their bodies in the line of fire. Men like Corporal Tom Hunter, a man who would become a legend for all Royal Marines.
Corporal Hunter was a section commander in 4-3 Royal Marines Commando during the Battle of Lake Camacho.
The battle took place in the final throes of the Second World War, as the Allies attempted to drive the Germans out of Italy. The Royal Marines were asked to attack well-defended German positions. Hunter and his men were exposed and taking a pummeling.
His troop was pinned down by German machine gun fire, and Hunter grabbed his Bren gun, got onto an exposed piece of ground, gave supporting fire, and then raced in with his Bren gun and destroyed the enemy.
Having seen his mates receive a battering from the German machine gun posts, Hunter had gone and taken them on single-handed, guns blazing, an action which saved his friends' lives, but cost his own.
Hunter was killed in the process and was awarded the VC posthumously.
Unleashing hell, Hunter handed out his own brand of gunishment using the classic Bren. Based on a Czechoslovakian design, this British beast first hit the battlefield in 1938.
In the grand scheme of things, the Bren gun is a very important weapon. This is the base of fire weapon for the British Army in the Second World War. This is the thing that keeps their head down while you maneuver against them. It's a very slow firing weapon. And because it's slow firing, it's very accurate. And it's a fully automatic weapon. When you pull the trigger, it fires fully automatically. But because it fires fairly slowly, you can milk the trigger and get single shots out of it.
Some men get so good with a Bren that they can even play tunes on it.
This weapon weighs a good 25 pounds. And consequently, I'm resting on my knee because carrying this thing will put a hurt on you. To fire this weapon from the hip and running, well, the adrenaline is going to have to be really pumping.
The Bren is a base of fire weapon. It was not designed to be picked up and shot from the hip. Ex-U.S. soldier Guy Richards shows just how tough a task that would have been for Corporal Tom Hunter.
The Bren gun can be fired in the assault mode from the hip. Let's see what it will do on these enemy melons. As you can see, the Bren gun can't be fired from the hip in the assault mode. I only had melons to kill. Tom Hunter had real Germans who shot back.
The legend of Tom Hunter greatly enhanced the legend of the Bren gun. But like Hunter himself, it had had its time. And in the 1960s, the Royal Marines adopted a bigger, badder base of fire weapon, the General Purpose Machine Gun. A metal-wrecking obstacle obliterator that is still going strong to this day.
This is the M240 General Purpose Machine Gun. This weapon replaced a Bren gun, and it gave a good deal more flexibility. The Bren, although it's an excellent design in its day, was limited by a 30-round box magazine. This is a belt fed, and all you have to do is keep running belts through it, clean it out every now and then, it's good to go. This is an infantryman's delight. Okay. Going hot. Machine guns get toasty warm. Let's look at the sizzle. This is why I advise machine gunners to wear gloves, because you're going to get burned. As you can see, the machine gun, 200 rounds, has completely demolished the wall. This wall would provide no protection whatsoever to anybody hiding behind it. Machine gun, 200, cinder wall block, 0.
Heavy firepower and an iron will has given the Royal Marines an edge in countless conflicts. But bringing the pain with a wall of lead rain isn't always the solution. Time and again, they've taken standard issue rifles and made every bullet count.
Imagine, if you will, rifle fire of an accuracy and volume which had never before been seen on the battlefield.
The Royal Marines are Britain's elite fighting force, trained and equipped to wage war anytime, anywhere. These guys bring the pain in any terrain. Rewind to the early 19th century, and the Royal Marines sailed the 7 seas with the British fleet. Acting as on-ship security, they had to be tough and disciplined. In 1815, after Napoleon's French army was defeated, the Royal Marines were given the task of guarding him as he was taken to exile. Asked to inspect his British captors, Napoleon commented, "Much might be done with 100,000 men such as these." Napoleon was right.
The Royal Marines reduce well-trained units which can do a variety of jobs. They can either be inserted amphibiously, or they can be put in by helicopter. And they can actually operate in a variety of different sorts of terrain.
Fighting in all environments demands firearms that can cope with extreme conditions and a lot of abuse. In World War II, the Royal Marines were issued with the British Rifle Classic, a .303 caliber legend that would prove to be every bit as tough as the Marine carrying it, the Lee Enfield. Over 100 years old, it's one old-timer you wouldn't want to tangle with.
The Enfield rifle is probably considered by most experts as one of the best military bolt-action service rifles ever issued. A rugged gun, an incredibly reliable gun. For example, it feeds from a 10-round box magazine that was charged with stripper clips, 5-round stripper clips, very quick to load. As far as cycling the action, you can imagine cycling the action on the gun when it fired. Very simple to cycle the action and get another round in the gun. It worked very quickly.
The Royal Marines were able to get rounds down at a pulverizing pace, a skill they enhanced through a legendary drill of furious bolt and trigger action.
The British Marines trained to a standard of 15 aimed rounds a minute. And with this, there's no problem in meeting that. In fact, the Royal Marines could do about 30 rounds a minute.
This devastating volley of fire was named the Mad Minute.
Imagine, if you will, a battalion of perhaps 800 men in fire positions, each of them firing 15 rounds a minute. And these are men who are capable of hitting a man-sized target most times at 600 yards. I mean, the mad minute from an infantry battalion would present what the great cliche wall of fire really means.
When the Germans ran across the British Marines, they thought they were being shot at with machine gun fire rather than rifle fire.
The mud, rain, grit, and snow of European operations never proved too tough for the Lee Enfield. But in Asian theaters where jungle prevailed, a few modifications were needed.
The Royal Marines specialised in what became known as out-of-area operations, which basically meant you went somewhere really, really hot in places like Malaya. And in order to patrol there, well, helicopters help in the jungle, but essentially you do 99% of what you're going to do in the jungle on foot.
The Royal Marines trained for up to 6 months in the jungle, sweating it out in humid, itchy, searingly hot conditions. It's an environment they have learned to thrive in.
Before you worry about the enemy in the jungle, you have to worry about looking after yourself. It's really warm in the jungle. There's lots to drink. If you know where to look, there's lots to eat. And when the sun sets, it is literally pitch dark.
June 1948, Malaya. Communist guerrillas rise up against their colonial British masters. A war of terror explodes, a jungle war, and the Royal Marine Commandos are right in the heart of it.
Malaya was a war of patrols and ambushes and jungle skills. And it's exactly the thing that Royal Marine Commandos were very good at.
To mount these ambushes, the Royal Marines needed a rifle that was shorter and lighter than the standard Lee Enfield.
This is a gun that was designed based off of the input that the British were getting from their troops in the Far East. That the heavier #1 Mark III was just too big, too long, too bulky in a jungle environment, too heavy to carry around, and they wanted a lighter carbine, hence the name jungle carbine.
The new jungle carbine was a rumble in the jungle knockout champ. It was 4 inches shorter than the standard Lee Enfield. The bolt knob was drilled out to lose weight. A flash suppressor and a rubber butt pad were added to help absorb the increased recoil.
#5 Mark I jungle carbine is kind of the last of the Lee Enfield series. Saw limited service and really was coming into service the same time that a full-size battle rifle would be more applicable.
After its jungle boogie in Malaya, the carbine and the Lee Enfield clan it derived from were phased out. The 1950s saw the Lee Enfield replaced as the standard British rifle by the SLR, the self-loading rifle. It was Britain's first semi-automatic, and the Royal Marines quickly took a shine to it.
This is the SLR, the self-loading rifle, or L1A1, a semi-automatic 7.62 millimeter gas-operated weapon. This is sort of the standard weapon of the Royal Marines well up into the 80s. A very, very, very good weapon.
Like the Lee Enfield, the SLR had to fight in the wildest, remotest battlefields on Earth. Battlefields like the Falkland Islands. The Falklands are a small group of British-owned islands situated in the southern Atlantic Ocean. When Argentina invaded the islands in 1982, the Royal Marines sailed halfway around the world to take the fight on. It would be a fascinating matchup, The Brits and the Argentinians were both packing SLRs. Only difference, one side had the fully auto version.
The SLR that the Royal Marines were using is a semi-automatic weapon. Every time you pull the trigger, it fires one round. The Argentinians had the FAL version, but theirs was fully automatic.
Having a full auto capability means lots of lead, but it comes at the price of accuracy. And Marines are all about accuracy.
Firing an SLR on automatic, I think you'd just do for fun or in a Rambo movie. The muzzle climb would be so big that the first shot would be the only one actually going in the direction of where you're aiming.
When you fire the SLR fully automatic, the first round is there, the second round is there, the third round's there, and anything after that, it's an anti-aircraft gun.
The Royal Marine Commandos were not going to let rate of fire beat them. They took the fight to the Argentinians on a quality, not quantity basis. This was a war that they were born for. Leading their tactical charge was Brigadier Julian Thompson.
Major General Julian Thompson, then Brigadier Thompson, is a first-rate technician. He was able to land his force quickly and then establish a base and then operate out of that base to retake the Falkland Islands.
But Thompson and the Royal Marine Commandos weren't just fighting the Argentinians. They were also fighting a completely unwelcoming and alien environment.
It is a very inhospitable place and a difficult place to operate in. Very wet, wind blows a huge amount, mountainous, rocky, and peat bog, which is very spongy, wet, impossible to drive across in a wheeled vehicle.
The environment was very harsh, and the logistics problems were great. Basically, the British troops had what they could carry. They had to march something like 90 miles from San Carlos, where the landing had taken place, to Port Stanley to actually fight the battles. And they did that, you know, virtually carrying everything on their back.
Because of our training, we were able to cope with this, able to cope with conditions that many troops would have found totally defeated them and made them totally useless.
Battling through icy winds, snow, and bullets, the British smashed the Argentines. In 10 weeks of intense action, the superior weapon skills of the Marines and their SLRs shone through.
The Falklands War was won not so much by superior technology, but by small groups of determined men who wanted to make a difference, and that might almost be a description of Royal Marines.
From the mud and mayhem of World War II to the jungles of Malaya and the wind-swept outcrops of the Falklands, the Royal Marines have taken ordinary British rifles and performed extraordinary tasks. Now, in the 21st century, they've adopted another new firearm. These British bulldogs have adopted a bull pup. Royal Marine Commandos, one of the world's toughest elite units. A special force that take their whirlwind of operations over land and over sea. Diversity of skills is at their core. Whether it's paddling a canoe on a midnight raid, scaling a mountain at extreme altitude, or flying a helicopter behind enemy lines, these guys are on it.
There are a number of different specializations within the Marines. You could become a pilot, you could become a mountain leader, go off and do a course with the engineers. My own specialization was to become a Royal Marines pilot.
Brian Adcock was a helicopter pilot with the Royal Marines for 11 years, airlifting commandos all around the world.
Royal Marines pride themselves on being able to operate at sea and on land. So I've been on a number of deployments where The helicopters get packed up along with all the Land Rovers, artillery pieces and everything else, taken off on deployment to other sides of the world, and then put back together again and used to fly operations from the ships and also on land.
Since the 1970s, the Royal Marines' chopper of choice has been the Lynx. A flexible, robust platform capable of toughing it out in the worst conditions. It's also got class.
The Lynx helicopter has often been described, certainly before the arrival of Apache, as the Ferrari of the military helicopter fleet in the UK. It really is a sexy beast of a helicopter to fly.
With twin Rolls-Royce engines under its hood, the Lynx is capable of hitting a top speed of over 200 miles per hour. That's the Lynx effect. And the Lynx offers versatility and adaptability the Royal Marines normally expect of themselves.
It can basically lift a section of men, which is 8 blokes with kit, around the battlefield. It can also be used as a medical transport, and in the particular mode that I was trained to fly it for, it's also used as an anti-tank helicopter.
The Lynx has been in service with the Royal Marines since the 70s and is still soaring high. Fangs out, it's ripping up the skies of Afghanistan to this day. When a Royal Marine chooses his speciality, he chooses to funnel and purify his skills to achieve distinction in one field. With a 1 in 5 pass rate, the hardest and most testing is the notorious mountain warfare Carter.
Training to become a mountain leader, to join the Mountain Arctic Warfare Cadre. It's 9 months long. You go to Scotland and you do probably the hardest military training package there is in UK, if not the world. You do a horrendous mountain exercise, carrying exceptionally large packs and difficult terrain. At the end of the exercise, you're then shipped off to the Hebrides and you're dumped with absolutely no kit apart from what you're standing in, your underwear and a thin shirt, a pair of boots with no laces. We then spent 10 days living off the land, eating roadkill from the local roads, eating some cattle fodder, and on one particularly memorable but unpleasant occasion, I ate 100 limpets without chewing any of them because I really don't like seafood at all. You then spend a month training out in the Swiss Alps, training to be an alpine mountaineer, and at the end of that you become a mountain leader.
The mountain warfare units are as essential now as they have ever been. In Afghanistan, the Royal Marine Commandos have duked it out with the Taliban at high altitude.
The Royal Marines have been sent out to Afghanistan. The territory there ideally suits them in that it's, generally speaking, very inhospitable, mountainous, desert, arid, nasty terrain, which our training ideally prepares us for.
Conditions in Afghanistan. Some of my Marines buddies have said they've been as cold as they've ever been, colder than sitting in piss-wet clothes on a training exercise.
With mountains, desert, freezing cold, driving sand, and the enemy to contend with, sometimes it's better to grab a lift. Looking for a multi-purpose set of wheels that could chew up the Afghan landscape, the Marines found a ride that could do just the job. The Viking.
The Vikings have been absolutely paramount, and without them, I think the Marines would have been struggling.
The Viking is a fully amphibious, armored, all-terrain vehicle, which consists of 2 linked track units. Dressed in anti-RPG slat armor, packing a 5.9-liter 6-cylinder turbo diesel engine, and with room for 12 fully laden soldiers. the Viking was designed especially for the Royal Marines. When they were deployed in Afghanistan, it enabled them to take a different tactical battle to the Taliban.
The Marines took their Vikings to Afghanistan, where they were hugely successful and played a great part in the mobility which enabled the Marines to take on the Taliban away from the buildings. Instead of holding up in buildings and base camps like their predecessors had done, they got out and dished it out to them right in the open. And 3 Vikings were blown up on mines, and the crews walked away on every single occasion.
And they're fantastic beasts, reliable, tough, quick, and they get you from A to B. The sort of distances that might take you 2 or 3 days to walk with a burden on your back, you can now do in 30 minutes.
Ransacking the rocky, dusty terrain, the Viking has been a marauding success. Yet, the assault rifle the Royal Marines pack in Afghanistan has been less successful and a lot more controversial. Following a flawless history of conventional and reliable assault rifles, the British took the radical step of adopting an unconventional weapon, the SA-80.
The SA-80 represented a real departure in British weapon technology. It was fully automatic, and it was a bullpup design. Now, the bullpup design meant that its working parts were contained in the weapon's butt. So it was going to be significantly shorter than the conventional rifle, which had a butt and then the working parts.
The SA-80 is 4 inches shorter than the Russian AK-47 and 8.5 inches shorter than the American M16. It also packs a 4x optical scope as standard.
The main advantages of the bullpup are, in fact, its compact size. It's easier under battlefield conditions to control because you don't have a long barrel sticking out, and for fighting in built-up areas and very confined areas, then the bullpup obviously has a great advantage.
The advantages of the bullpup seem conclusive, but on the battlefield, results have been mixed. Among the major powers, only the British and French field a bullpup design, and both suffered teething problems.
The SA-80, when it first came in the mid-1980s, was not a terribly popular weapon. It lacked reliability. The working parts were fiddly. It was prone to jamming if it got dust or dirt or ice or snow in it. And if you're operating in extreme environments like the Royal Marines do, in the Arctic or in the desert, then that's a real problem.
The British government decided to stick with the bullpup concept, and in 2000 commissioned German manufacturer Heckler & Koch to revamp the SA-80.
The improvements that were made to the rifle are internal, to make sure that it doesn't jam, certainly when there's mud or sand about. It has led to a great improvement in the rifle under battlefield conditions.
The revamp was a resounding success. Like a phoenix from the flames, the SA-80 was reborn.
The net result is now, I think, a pretty impressive weapon. Capable of fully automatic fire, easy to handle because it's short and stubby and carries comfortably across the middle of the body, and with a good sight on it, which enables the infantryman fighting in a variety of circumstances to get a really good magnified view of his opponent.
The Royal Marines are the military chameleons, hauling ass wherever the rumble is on. But their heritage as commanders of the high seas can never be ignored, and nor can their most famous amphibious achievement.
The idea was the crews would paddle up the estuary, hiding at night, put explosive on the enemy vessels and get away.
The Royal Marines are a multi-purpose, multi-skilled, amphibious, and land-attacking green tsunami. They can take a mission on anywhere and everywhere. But their pre-commando history lies way back on the high seas, in a time where they would board and butcher the enemy's vessel.
The Royal Marines have been in existence for several hundred years. Essentially, they provided boarding parties on Royal Navy ships, you know, way back into the sort of 18th, 17th century.
During the 9 Years' War with France in the late 17th century, the Royal Marines headed up attacks on the enemy by raiding their ships.
The primary duties of the Marines was to be in effect the embarked infantry on board a warship, and particularly when you came to ship-to-ship combat, when after you battered one another with your cannons, the ships closed, they would be part of the group to storm over into the hostile ship to fight it out in what was in effect a hand-to-hand combat.
The hand-to-hand combat was brutal and bloody. These vicious attacks were carried out using the multi-purpose boarding axe.
It was an axe with a blade one side and quite often with a spike the other side.
But I think if you want to imagine a particularly ghastly prospect, think of some swarthy sailor or marine leaping onto your deck, clutching a boarding axe. And the psychological impact doesn't bear thinking about it.
Some great big guy was coming at you swinging a boarding axe. You'd suddenly think of an urgent appointment elsewhere.
The Royal Marines often have an appointment elsewhere. One major appointment came with the Germans during World War II, when they drew upon their nautical ancestry for what became a legendary mission of daring and danger. By 1941, the German supplies were running thin. To sustain their war effort, they were shipping in vital materials such as oil, rubber, and metals from the Far East. The hub of their supply line was the French port of Bordeaux. In an initiative designed by Lord Mountbatten, the Royal Marines were charged with entering Bordeaux and blowing up these ships, diminishing the Germans' vital materials and stock. The mission codename, Operation Frankton.
One of the big operations the Royal Marines went on during World War II was to attack Bordeaux. And to attack Bordeaux, they had to paddle a long, long way in canvas canoes.
The idea was the crews would paddle up the estuary, hiding at night, put explosive on the enemy vessels and get away.
Major Herbert Hasler, nicknamed Blondie Hasler due to his golden mane, led the mission of 6 canoes on the evasive paddle toward their Bordeaux-based targets. Spewing from a submarine and then kayaking for 70 miles, carrying a tooled-up crew, this was a never-seen-before mission that required a never-seen-before canoe.
The canoes used by Blondie Hasler's men were of a special design designed by him, as he was a small boat expert. There were 2 aspects that he designed into them. One was they had to fold in order to go down into the hatch of a submarine.
Unlike conventional canoes, which had canvas bases, Hasler's design had a plywood bottom, making it stronger and more durable. He also designed it to fold down to half its height.
They were sufficiently sturdy to be able to be paddled up onto a beach and dragged without being punctured, because he realized that they were going to have to get pretty rough manhandling in their trip.
Hasler's canoe was dubbed the cockle shell due to its hard exterior and aquatic durability. En route, 8 men were either captured or drowned, but 2 canoes slipped through the net and made it to Bordeaux. upon arrival in the port. Their task was to blow up and make seabed slurry of the German ships. To do this, they adopted the most blistering of barnacles.
The Royal Marines succeeded in sinking several ships by attaching limpet mines to them. A limpet mine is attached to a ship using a magnetic force. You turn the magnet on, the magnet adheres to the ship. After a while, the time fuse goes off, and you blow a hole in the ship sinks.
The limpet mines were attached magnetically to the ship's hull, roughly 7 feet under the water. A timer could be set for up to several hours, giving those placing the mine time to make their escape. Small in size, the mines only pack 9 pounds of explosive. But underwater, that caused a 3-foot hole in the hull of the German ships. The commandos had achieved their goal. Several German freight boats were done for. By the end, only 2 men, including Hasler, made it back. But their story went down in legend, as did their name, the Cockleshell Heroes.
Only in the end, one vessel, that crewed by Major Hasler and his opposite number, were able to get away. 90% casualties, but a successful raid, causing great consternation to the Nazis.
The Royal Marine Commandos are a steamroller of land and amphibious special forces. They defend a small nation with the power, guile, and strength of a Goliath. Drawn together, the branches on their family tree reflect their unique genesis. From vicious axe fights in the Age of Sail to jungle and mountain warfare. From the world's longest and most arduous training regime to cool, calculating commandos. The Royal Marines. They are Britain's brilliant, brutal elite.